Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, so this will be a talk about succeeding as a product manager with anxiety. As a quick reminder, this talk is for educational purposes only, and it doesn't constitute medical advice. So I'll share a little bit about myself. My name is Lee Howard. I graduated from UC Berkeley with a cognitive science degree, and the two people that had the biggest impact on my career trajectory at school were James Landay, who's now a computer science professor at Stanford, and Scott Clemmer, who's now, I believe he's like an assistant professor at UC San Diego's design lab, and he's kind of growing the UX and design classes at UC San Diego. So Scott Clemmer was a graduate student instructor under James Landay. I started my career as a product designer at Autodesk and then later at MindJet for a handful of years. I eventually moved into user research and product management at MindJet, and then did independent product and UX consulting for a few years for the flexible schedule that it afforded me. And then after that, I basically stepped into full-time product management roles in the nonprofit tech startup space, in data analytics, and HR tech. I helped to work on a HR platform, APIs, and B2B features. I've also worked in digital ventures at Shell and worked on mobile apps at AAA. Most recently, I worked as a product manager on a hardware research team, focusing on mobile apps and advances in sensors and radars and early device concepts at Google. And then I'll be starting as a senior product manager at Sephora later this month. So today I'm going to talk about how to succeed as a product manager with anxiety. I will first talk about what anxiety is. Then I want to dive deeper into anxiety triggers that are specific to product management. Then I'd like to talk about succeeding as a product manager with anxiety and giving you some ideas to fill up your anxiety management toolbox. And then I'll leave you with some final thoughts and resources before we walk into Q&A. All right, so what is anxiety? And more importantly, why should we care? Well, anxiety is intense, excessive, and persistent worry and fear about everyday situations. You might experience a fast heart rate, rapid breathing, sweating, or feeling tired. And then generalized anxiety is severe, ongoing anxiety that interferes with daily activities. I grabbed this definition from the Mayo Clinic website. It's just a pretty generic definition. But to give anxiety a little bit more flavor and to personalize it a little bit, I wanted to share with you how I experience anxiety as a product manager. And for me, anxiety shows up if something triggers me. The symptoms that I get are typically kind of a nauseous pit in my stomach. I start to feel like I'm getting queasy or getting sick. My throat will start to get dry. It'll become hard for me to swallow. I'll feel like a weight on my shoulders. And sometimes I might even get disoriented or feel dizzy. So those are some of the physical symptoms and psychological symptoms that I get when I experience anxiety. And after working in tech and specifically in product management for several years now, I've come to the conclusion that product management has a lot of anxiety triggers that are pretty specific to the product management role, but they could also be extrapolated a little bit to the world of tech and probably user experience design as well. But I'm just going to focus on these based on my experience. So first of all, product management interviewing is like a minefield of anxiety triggers for a lot of different reasons. Product management interviewing can be very stressful. You might be you might be scrutinized and forced to think on your feet in a very kind of time crunch situation. And so product management interviewing can definitely trigger your anxiety. And I'd be happy to go into more detail on PM interviewing in the Q&A if that's of interest to you. And then because product management is a much bigger career and much more varied career than it ever was before, if you're not in a good PM role fit, this could definitely be a trigger for anxiety. So, if you happen to really enjoy, managing or working on launching certain types of products and the fit for you isn't great, this could cause a lot of anxiety at work. Also, balancing needs. Product managers are, working across different departments and groups in a company, and balancing needs becomes like a constant act, and sometimes it can start to feel like you're spinning plates or trying to spin plates and keep them all in the air. Also, launching products in and of itself can be very anxiety triggering, especially those weeks and days leading up to the launch. So more anxiety triggers have to do with these here. Time management starts to become really critical for product managers. Product managers need to focus on high level long-term thinking as well as very detailed short-term thinking. And before you know it, the to-do list is a mile long and prioritizing and being able to say no to things becomes much more important. But managing your time could definitely become a trigger for anxiety. There's also interpersonal relations. A big part of product manager's job is the communication and soft skills aspect. And this means that you're caring about virtually everybody else that's working on your team and across team groups as well. And so you end up juggling many different interpersonal relations, and even if most of them are going really well and you're feeling aligned and working well, even if there's just one awkward or stressful relationship, it could cause anxiety. And there's a lot of reasons why there might be interpersonal problems. Somebody could be gaslighting you, bullying you. There could be any number of toxic behaviors that might be happening at work. There's also performance anxiety. There's typical classic performance anxiety where you might be nervous about presenting to a certain audience, maybe presenting up the ladder, or just having some performance anxiety in general, speaking in public. But there's also another type of performance anxiety that happens with product managers, and that's that there is a lot of demands to perform and to be creative, to creatively perform over and over again, to problem solve and stay creative. And so this, these requirements to constantly be performing can start to add up and also trigger anxiety. And also just the sheer cognitive load of keeping up with the technology and the technology industry, all the things that you need to learn on the job, and the constant stimulation of digital communication, digital media, all of that together could start to weigh on you cognitively. And we all only have a certain amount of cognitive capacity that we have throughout the day. And so if you don't guard it or nurture it carefully, you could get triggered by that as well. So as if these triggers weren't enough, there are all these additional triggers as well that are just generic. External factors like what's going on with your family, your health, your finances, and how you're relating to the context of all the world's issues. There's also self-care triggers. How's your nutrition, your sleep, your personal hygiene, your exercise habits, your screen time habits, and your general stress management techniques. And then there's also mindset triggers. If you are falling into habits with a fixed mindset, or you're leaning on learned helplessness, um, or getting stuck in a pattern of blame, shame, or avoidance, or constantly feeling in a state of self-defense, in that fight, flight, or freeze state. So after after going over all of these anxiety triggers, some of which are very particular to product management or show up a lot in product management, you might ask yourself, well, what's the point? We might as well throw our hands up in the air and just give up. This is just too anxiety inducing, and for somebody who suffers from anxiety, this might not be the right role. But I'm here to tell you, and I'm here to tell you that that's not true, and that there is good news. Generalized anxiety doesn't have to completely stop you from becoming a successful product manager. Your professional journey brought you to the doorstep of this career. Now it's time to reflect on why you enjoy the role, where do you excel, what energizes you, and what part of the role makes your fear and anxiety melt away and allows you to experience that mastery and flow that you probably love so much. And this is when you get to be really specific about why you love PM and reflect back on the times when you felt the most at ease. And so the formula that I would share with you is to, one, become aware of your triggers and just apply that method of awareness as much as you can. And then prepare your anxiety management toolbox. So just to quickly summarize those kind of PM specific triggers: PM interviewing, PM role fit, balancing needs, launching products, managing your time, interpersonal relations, performance anxiety, and cognitive load. You just reflect on that and think about your top triggers. This could really help you. And then as you reflect throughout your workday, throughout your work week, throughout your work quarter, and soon enough, in real time, as you're just going through your day, having your conversations and your meetings and doing your thinking and your devising and your designing and everything, you're going to start to employ that method of awareness to catch yourself and really reflect on those triggers. Now we can talk about the anxiety management toolbox. So more good news is that there are so many tools that you can use to manage your anxiety. And I want to just share some of my top suggestions here, and I've categorized them into 4 buckets. The first and most important one, I believe, is avoiding isolation. Then we'll talk about getting creative, being prepared, and fighting back. So first and most important is to avoid isolation. It's very easy to try to hide your symptoms or avoid them, deny them, and also to suffer alone and suffer in silence. And this is probably the worst thing you can do from my personal experience. So avoiding isolation, isolation avoidance tools include seeking out therapy and psychiatry, joining industry groups just like this one, getting a coach, connecting with nature and with animals. Avoiding isolation doesn't just mean spending time with other people. It could be animals or nature. Make it a priority to build great relationships and collect allies. This also means not being afraid to kind of blend that line between the personal and professional. And one of the best ways to do that is to find people that are interested in the same things you are professionally, but that aren't working with you directly, so that you don't have that pressure of working together, but you have those people to talk talk shop with, so to speak. And then also avoiding isolation might also mean helping others, not just seeking help out for yourself. So it can work both ways. Now, getting creative, creativity tools. I would just encourage you to be creative about your careers and your job setups to help kind of support your symptoms, or to basically avoid any more triggers than you have to absolutely tolerate. This might mean getting creative about your job arrangements, giving yourself a little bit more time to find the right company culture, giving yourself extra time in your job search so that you don't feel pressured or with your back against the wall. You can at least do a better job of finding a better fit for you. And then also spend time exploring the type of product work that you want to do. So for product managers, this might mean thinking about the size of the company, the stage of maturity of the products and services, the types of customers. And for designers, I would say very similar. Next, there's things that you can put in your toolbox that are focused on preparation and being more prepared so that you can feel more in control of the situation. A lot of companies ask their product managers to develop pre-mortems, which is like a post-mortem, but you do it before your product or service launches or before you get deep into a project. So pre-mortems would be something like giving yourself the time and the space to just write out a list of all of the things that could possibly go wrong, or all of the things that you think might end up just being a total disaster. And then kind of describing why those things would happen. And then it gives you a chance to think about what you would do to correct it, or what you would do to change the situation. This is similar to a risk assessment as well, but for me, the difference is that a risk assessment can happen at any time during a project, the beginning, middle, or end, whereas a pre-mortem happens pretty early in the project. Another way that you can be more prepared is to practice finding the right words. And this is one of my favorite tools in my toolbox. I actually have flashcards where I've written down like the exact script or the exact words that I might want to use in situations that might trigger my anxiety. So I can give you one specific example. In situations where there are multiple people in a meeting, and it seems to me like a colleague intentionally or unintentionally might steal my idea or talk over me, or otherwise undermine me in some way, whether it was intentional or not. It doesn't even matter. But one thing that I find can be very empowering and can diffuse anxiety in me and allow me to speak up and speak my mind is to say, thank you, colleague, for spotlighting my point. Thank you for spotlighting my point. And so I've basically collected a handful of kind of the right words for me that can help me kind of navigate triggering situations. So that's something that I kind of learned from experience and I wanted to share with you. There's some great articles out there. If you seek them out, I found a few gems in my day with like specific phrases that you could employ just to help you navigate stressful situations. Another way of being prepared is just to create an action plan. Don't leave as many things to chance or to your emotions as you might have in the past, and just be a little bit more intentional with your action plan. Any little bit will help. And then of course, practice. So, whatever the triggers are for you, this blends in a little bit into creating a fear ladder, but practicing will likely make you more comfortable in situations that trigger anxiety for you. The final category final toolbox category tool category is to fight back. And this is where I would kind of challenge you uh, to kind of not take no for an answer, or not accept your anxiety at face value each and every time. And there are a handful of tools that you could use. One of them is creating a fear ladder worksheet, or filling out a fear ladder worksheet, where you list situations or actions that trigger anxiety for you, from least triggering to most triggering, and slowly work your way up the ladder by exposing yourself to those triggering situations, and just practicing exposing yourself to them, and reflecting on how you did in those situations. You can also employ a very common cognitive behavioral therapy technique, which is to talk back to your anxious thoughts, and observe them, observe your thoughts, try not to get as connected to them, and then call them out for what they are. They could potentially be distorted thoughts, or incorrect thoughts, or inaccurate thoughts. And there's nothing to say that you couldn't talk back to those thoughts. Actively practicing meditation and mindfulness is extremely powerful. This one, the only thing I would say about this one is that it takes a while for meditation and mindfulness to have an effect. And sometimes people give up too soon. So the only thing I would caution with that one is to really commit to it at least 6 months or a year before claiming that it doesn't work for you. And then, whether or not you feel like moving or not, there's sometimes when you feel so anxious, the only thing you should really do is really take it easy and rest, and not push yourself at all. However, movement has also been proven to reduce anxiety. So you may want to fight back against those tendencies just a little bit, and get moving, and see if that helps you at all. So that concludes a multitude of ideas of tools that you can put in your toolbox to help you manage anxiety. And I wanted to leave you some final thoughts. So first of all, I did want to say that it's not all good news. People that suffer from anxiety do tend to have a slightly harder time of things. And that's just the way it is. This might mean that the perfect career trajectory that you had hoped, or that you might see other people enjoying, that might not be what pans out for you, because there are things that might be a bit harder for you, and that's just the way it is. Promotions might be harder to come by, they might take longer, the career path might not be as straightforward as you had hoped. So in this sense, I just wanted to kind of temper the optimism and let you know that there will be obstacles and challenges in the way. But I'm confident that with the right tools, people with anxiety can still be very successful. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is that the reason why we should care, I wanted to mention this a little bit earlier in my talk, but the reason why we should care about this is because anxiety is the most common mental health disorder in the world. And even if we don't suffer from anxiety, or those of you that are listening to this talk right now aren't suffering from anxiety, it's very likely that somebody that you work with, somebody that you're reporting to, or somebody that you're managing, or maybe even the founder or CEO of your company is suffering from anxiety. So in that sense, it's really important to be aware of it. And so for those who are even more curious, I have some resources here, some podcasts and some books. The Anxiety Guy podcast is very good. The Anxious Achiever podcast is almost like created just for us, for highly ambitious women in technology. This podcast is very entertaining. The Huberman Lab podcast out of Stanford University is very good. The only thing I would say about these podcasts from the Huberman Lab is that they're extremely long. So they're usually almost 2 hours long, each podcast. So you have to find some time. And then Lisa Kostova's Female Tech Exec podcast is very good. And I find her her style and tone is really intimate and gets to the heart of the matters really quickly and really well. So I highly recommend that podcast. And then here are some books on anxiety that I recommend: Feeling Good, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, Hope and Help for Your Nerves, the Anxiety and Phobia workbook. And then the newest one on this list is Adventures of Women in Tech workbook by Alana Karen. I met Alana while I was working at Google, and she invited me to review the follow-up workbook to her original book called Adventures of Women in Tech. And the workbook is extremely helpful, especially if you like to write and like to reflect or like to journal. It could be an extremely helpful book for you. So I hope you do check it out and review it. And I did want to mention that if your anxiety is beyond severe and you are unable to work, there is help. And here's some information that I wanted to share with you. There's always a hotline available for 24 hours a day. It's a crisis hotline. You can always call it. And then the government has mental health resources for you. And I do want to encourage you to stay in touch with me. I love to meet new people, especially in product and tech. So, and ladies in product and tech, especially. So, thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lee. I certainly learned a lot and do have a lot of follow-up questions. Would like to take this time to open up some Q&A for the rest of the group. If anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to ask them now. Okay, well, I have a few questions here.
Sure.
Yes, as someone who, is in tech and do identify as dealing with levels of anxiety, can you talk about your experience navigating the workplace as a woman with either with anxiety or like working with someone who possibly could have, and how do you establish those relationships to support them?
So is your question how to identify other people in the workplace who may have anxiety?
Or how do you navigate through kind of the workplace in general with someone with high anxiety, or if you identify as somebody with high anxiety, or like how would you support somebody with high?
Yeah. So sometimes it takes one to know one. So if you, so first of all, you start to cultivate like an interest in people, like a keen interest in people. And sometimes you can notice things that, like the way people communicate or their communication style or just how they handle stress. You may intuit or infer that somebody is, dealing with anxiety. It's one of those things that's a bit of a sensitive subject. Do you bring it up? Do you tell your boss or your colleague or your employee that you have anxiety? Do you not bring it up and just use your tools in your toolbox? This is a personal decision, and I think everybody has to make that decision for themselves. But I do love it when CEOs or executives share about their mental health. It makes it much more okay to talk about those things and navigate through them at work. But I always try to employ some of the tools that I just mentioned for any situation. And, I'm still learning as well. I think the most important thing is like learning more about yourself. And then the more you know about yourself, the more you can probably guess what other people are going through as well. That's why it's so important to be observant and become aware of your own triggers, so that you can prevent them or manage them when they come around.
Yes, it's definitely great points here. I do like your comment where you bring up CEOs mentioning topics of mental health. Definitely makes them more relatable, but also to your point that it's more common than many people think.
And you can imagine if people admit it more, then it's just out in the open and everybody can just acknowledge it. And then the faster you acknowledge it, the faster you can get to a resolution or a solution. And the closer people can become at work too. But when you avoid it or hide it or deny it, it just takes that much longer to solve problems together.
Exactly. Yeah, there's
So,
definitely a stigma around.
yeah, yeah. And it takes longer to build trust with people if you can't share that you're having anxious feelings right now, you know? So
Awesome.
Becky had asked, how do you deal with facing critique? Yeah, so for Becky, it's possible that facing critique might be one of your anxiety triggers. Is that possible? It might be that it's one of Becky's anxiety triggers. And you know, this for me, this falls into interpersonal relations and also performance anxiety, because we all get reviews when we're at work. They can be extremely triggering. And yeah, it's totally understandable that facing criticism or critique could be anxiety triggering. It's something that you might end up going home and ruminating about, and your anxiety might show up in that way, that you ruminate over the feedback and you can't stop thinking about it, and it's just rolling around in your head over and over again and making you feel very awkward and inadequate. And that's an awful place to be. No doubt. The workbook by Alana Karen, and I think Marilee Nika is the co-author, actually has an entire chapter about that, about taking feedback and asking for feedback and processing it. So my advice would be to look through that chapter to get some ideas. One of the best insights from that chapter in that book is that you don't actually have to take all the feedback or critique that you get seriously. You don't even have to take the critique at all. And I think that it's something that maybe comes with time, but that at some point you start to kind of tell the difference between genuine, helpful feedback or critique and feedback that doesn't serve you at all and actually might not even be true. But it takes a little bit of practice to get there, and can be difficult in the beginning. Because we're not as seasoned in our careers and we might not be as confident in the beginning. And that's all very understandable. One other piece of advice I can give about facing critique is to be more and more brave and courageous about asking for feedback a little bit more often, so that the critique and the feedback doesn't come as a total shock and surprise once a year at that review, so that you could check in with feedback more frequently. One second. And that also, it took me a while as well to start practicing, but once I did it, one positive thing that can come out of that is that you might be receiving a lot more positive feedback than you actually think you would get. And it helps to temper some of the negative feedback that you will inevitably get. So it will help you to temper the critical feedback. But it takes a little bit of courage to ask for it. I did that in my last job and I got a lot of great, feedback just by asking. And it helped to temper any of the critical feedback that I got for certain projects here and there. Maybe one last observation I can make about criticism is that even if you get really great feedback, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stay on your team, that you'll keep your job, or that you'll get a promotion. Those things don't necessarily go hand in hand, because there's so many different reasons why you might stay on a team, get hired or fired, get promoted or demoted. So you don't want to lull yourself into, you don't want to lull yourself into kind of a false confidence just because you're starting to ask for feedback and you're getting good feedback. So you start to get more nuanced in kind of determining how things are progressing at work for you. Yeah.
Awesome. I do see a lot of great reactions from that response. Jessica has her hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I don't have my video on. So, I am in a position where I think I'm going to have to leave the role that I'm in currently. And I'm very much like on the event horizon of anxiety-based burnout. And so I'm just wondering if you have any specific advice for that unique position of being on the verge of burnout, but needing to find a new role, and sort of how to do that gentle dance of like working out of the anxiety burnout into the momentum for a new role.
Yeah, that's a great question. So is it that you've been anxious and feeling that anxiety and stress for a really long time? Now you're burnt out, you've reached your absolute limit, and you've finally made the decision that it's time to go?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah.
Yeah, it's, I think just the global pandemic and,
Yeah.
work with less support and, exercising, going to therapy, eating well, sleeping religiously, trying to knock all those things off of the checklist and finally just coming to the realization, like, I think it's just this role and I need to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that extra sleep or that extra meditation session gives you the space to finally realize that is when you're like in the heart of the storm or the eye of the hurricane or whatever, you can't really even see out of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my only advice would be to be as gentle with yourself as possible at this point, because what lies ahead is going to be stressful as well.
Exactly.
And there might be, there's so many interesting, like, tech ladies are in high demand, and yet the great jobs are still really competitive and really hard. We're always in that in between phase where we're like, oh, this is a great career domain, and there's a lot of demand, but also like competition can also be high for the best roles. So, I mean, the best advice I could give you is to be as gentle with yourself as possible and not be hard on yourself. And just to admit to yourself that finding your next gig might take a little time. And that might mean that you might have some weeks in between two jobs, or you may have to suffer with your current job for a little bit longer in order to make that transition. But I guess my advice would just to be as gentle and kind to yourself as possible, and to, yeah, to recognize like what is in your control and what is not in your control at your current role, and just to be really kind to yourself. Like, all the tools in the anxiety management toolbox aren't meant to be even more stressful for you, and they're not meant for you to be a perfectionist about them in any way. So yeah, I think that would be my best advice. A lot of people, they're not even that aware, and they just sabotage themselves at work and then get fired, so it's great that you're even recognizing that and taking the initiative first. I guess my only other advice is to talk to as many recruiters and companies as you possibly can, and just have those conversations. And it can boost your confidence. It could introduce you to people that you never thought you would meet. So just take as many calls as you can, and yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Practice. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of practice, I noticed, at least for me, while I'm trying to maintain the mental health balance and doing my full 8 hours of sleep and exercise and what, even that is a process that I'm learning that I need to be patient with. And it's definitely it's not a switch where you can just like check off everything on the list and and then I will maintain balance. So do you have any advice for those in that space, like working towards getting to that place of balance, or like alleviating some anxiety?
Well, I would say, and I forgot to mention this during my talk, but one thing I would say is that you even if you're not going to be perfect at it or find like the best tools for you right away, you should, my advice is that you should prioritize managing your anxiety very highly. So in other words, when you think about yourself and your career, I almost would suggest that your second career should be managing your anxiety. Like if it's been a problem for you and something that you really want to tackle. And so to kind of think of yourself as an athlete or as if you're already an executive, and that this is really important and it's non-negotiable and it's as important as anything else. And when you get to that point where you think about it as like investing in yourself because you are a high-powered, person and you have this athlete's mindset, you just will then kind of invest in yourself, and keep investing in yourself and not give up on yourself and things like that. So I don't know if you, and keep it a high priority and think of yourself as an athlete who needs to stay in peak condition, then you hopefully will not lose the momentum and you won't lose like that interest that you need to like keep going with those practices. And a lot of the tools in my toolbox have changed over time. Like I used to love to do 90-minute yoga sessions, but there's no way that I'm going to go to a studio, do a 90-minute yoga session and then come back. Like I just don't have that kind of free time anymore. And I was always intimidated by like silent meditation and breathing techniques because my mind would never calm down enough for that. Well, if you keep thinking of yourself as an athlete and that you have to keep your mindset, strong, you're just willing to try and experiment new things, and like I said, meditation and mindfulness and breathing those are the types of things that take a while to see any benefits from. And so, yeah, I bet it's easy to give up and to lose patience unless you make like stress management and anxiety management as important to you as your career itself. Then you start to develop like the patience that you need to do all those things, like with the process. Like it's a forever thing, basically. Yeah.
Makes total sense. Yes.
Yeah. And if it's a forever thing, then you're like, oh, okay, well, then I have forever to get it right or to perfect it or whatever. So.
I'm really glad that you brought up the point of being very patient, especially with, a lot of the population likes that instant gratification. And I am one of them.
Yeah. And tech products and services are always touting speed and efficiency, but yeah, some things you just need to devote time to. So.
Great. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Since the group is small, maybe one last thing that I'd be interested in hearing is like what people's backgrounds are and where they're working right now and like what are their interests. We just have a few people on the call, so maybe we have a little time for that.
Yes, that's a great idea. I will start first, I guess. I am Shanae Evans. I am the chapter lead of Ladies at UX Seattle, but also I am a senior UX designer at Coverse, an SAIC subsidiary, and I am located in Seattle, Washington.
Cool.
And some of my interests, I'm not sure if that was one of your questions. I totally
forgot. No, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of sports, so I exercise a lot. So I'm a big foodie. So, and Seattle is a great city to be a foodie. So yeah.
Awesome. Great to meet you.
Yes.
Anybody else?
I think I can be next.
Sure.
And hey, so my name is Bai. I'm a UX and product designer. I'm a freelancer from Taiwan. And I guess the reason I'm joining is because I want to kind of listen how others' story like it is or something. Yeah. And another thing I want to mention, I need to kind of like another like 8 minutes, I need to kind of drop out because I have other things to do.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for
All
the
right.
yes.
Bye. Great.
I'm a UX researcher and I'm currently in nonprofits
Ah,
and thinking that I need to get out of nonprofits. But I'm also a trained sommelier. So I too am super into food and wine and not so much travel these days, but that's also a big part of my life too.
yeah.
No, that's
Maybe,
great.
hopefully you can put the two passions together. There's a lot of awesome
Yeah.
tech companies in the food space.
Yeah. Definitely where I'm sneaking around in the corners of things right now.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Great.
Hi, my name is Becky. I'm not like in the tech field yet, so I'm just kind of like at that early stage trying to figure out like whether this is the right field for me and to see like what's in it.
Hopefully we didn't scare you away.
Yeah, I think it's good because like I also face anxiety and I'm just like, oh, like what happened if I jump into this and I don't like it?
Mhm.
Or like, oh, because I'm kind of learning at the beginning of UX and people like you usually learn about UX research and a lot of that is talking to random people or like asking people for critique and I'm like, ooh, that's scary.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you definitely, well, for UX research, yeah, you do end up interviewing people and observing them quite a bit. Yeah. Great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Becky, the beauty of UX, the umbrella of UX or even design in general, there's many paths that you can go. It is not, your path to success isn't linear. So that's really a great point to make. And I'm glad that you're very involved in, the Ladies at UX community. So feel free to always reach out and ask us if you have any questions or concerns about, the industry that you're getting into. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Great. Well, thank you again, Lee, for your time and for your insights into, navigating the world as a person with anxiety. Yeah, and it's definitely insightful presentation.
Okay, great. Well, keep in touch, ladies. I wish you all a lot of luck and let me know if I could help you in any way.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone so much. And feel free to join our Slack community and be engaged in our next upcoming event for at the end of the month as well. And yes, we'll be in touch shortly. Thank you.
Bye, Shanae. Thanks for the invite.
Everybody.
Bye, ladies. Bye.